talk about the greatest in-ring performers of all time. One name almost always enters the conversation sooner or later: Dynamite Kid. To some, he was a revolutionary who completely changed what professional wrestling could look like. To others, he became a cautionary tale about the devastating cost of chasing perfection inside the ring. His story isn't simply about championships or fame. It's about extraordinary talent, unbearable physical pain, personal choices, and a legacy that continues to divide wrestling fans decades later. Today's video takes a closer look at one of the most emotional episodes of Dark Side of the Ring, exploring who Dynamite Kid really was, why his career changed wrestling forever, and why his life remains one of the sport's greatest tragedies. This video is intended as commentary, analysis, and historical discussion based on publicly documented events and interviews. To understand why this episode leaves such a lasting impression, we first have to understand the wrestling world that created Dynamite Kid. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, professional wrestling looked very different from what audiences see today. Television exposure was expanding, territories still controlled much of North America, and Japan was becoming a destination for some of the toughest and most technically gifted wrestlers in the world. It was an era where performers were expected to wrestle through injuries, hide pain from promoters, and constantly prove they belonged. In that environment, Tom Billington, better known as Dynamite Kid, emerged as someone who seemed almost superhuman. Despite standing only around 5 feet 8 inches tall, Dynamite Kid possessed incredible strength, explosive speed, and a level of intensity that immediately separated him from his peers. At a time when many heavyweight wrestlers relied on slow, methodical matches, he introduced a style that felt years ahead of its time. High-impact suplexes, lightning-fast counters, crisp, technical wrestling, and breathtaking aerial attacks became his trademarks. Watching his matches today, it's easy to see why so many modern wrestlers credit him as a major influence. Moves and sequences that audiences now consider normal were groundbreaking when Dynamite Kid performed them decades ago. The documentary does an effective job of showing that wrestling history often remembers legends for what happened inside the ring, while sometimes overlooking what happened outside of it. That contrast becomes one of the episode's central themes. The same relentless drive that pushed Dynamite Kid toward greatness also became one of the forces that slowly destroyed him. Wrestling wasn't simply his profession, it became his identity. Every match demanded maximum effort, every performance required another risk, and every injury was treated as something to overcome rather than something to heal. One of the defining chapters of his career came through his partnership with Davey Boy Smith. Together, they became the British Bulldogs, one of the most celebrated tag teams of the 1980s. Their combination of athleticism, power, and chemistry made them stand out in an era filled with memorable teams. Fans admired their exciting matches and believable teamwork, while promoters recognized that they could consistently deliver performances that elevated entire events. For many viewers, the Bulldogs represented the future of tag team wrestling. But success rarely tells the whole story. Behind the scenes, wrestling culture during that era encouraged extreme physical sacrifice. Painkillers, constant travel, and working through serious injuries were often treated as normal parts of the job. Instead of taking months away from competition to recover, many wrestlers returned to the ring far too early because they feared losing opportunities or disappointing promoters. The documentary reminds viewers that this culture didn't affect just one wrestler. It shaped an entire generation. Dynamite Kid's wrestling style was both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. Every explosive dropkick, every diving headbutt, every high-angle suplex thrilled audiences, but also placed enormous stress on his body. Over time, those impacts accumulated. Neck injuries, back problems, joint damage, and chronic pain became constant companions. Modern sports medicine emphasizes long-term recovery and injury prevention, but many of those resources either didn't exist or weren't widely embraced in professional wrestling during his peak years. Another reason this episode resonates so strongly is because it refuses to simplify its subject into either a hero or a villain. Human beings are rarely that simple, and Dynamite Kid's life certainly wasn't. Former colleagues speak with enormous respect for his unmatched talent, while also describing difficult personal experiences and complicated relationships. Family members share painful memories that reveal how fame and personal struggles can affect those closest to a public figure. The documentary challenges viewers to wrestle with uncomfortable questions about whether extraordinary talent can ever be separated from harmful behavior. As viewers, it's easy to celebrate unforgettable matches without considering the emotional and psychological pressures behind them. Wrestlers often spend hundreds of days each year away from home, living with constant uncertainty about injuries, income, and career longevity. For someone whose entire identity revolves around being the best, even a small decline in physical ability can feel devastating. In Dynamite Kid's case, those pressures appeared to grow heavier as injuries mounted, and his body gradually stopped responding the way it once had. The episode also explores how professional wrestling itself evolved because of performers like Dynamite Kid. Today's audiences expect faster pacing, greater athleticism, dramatic near falls, and physically demanding action because pioneers like him helped redefine audience expectations. Wrestlers across multiple generations have acknowledged borrowing techniques, psychology, and intensity from his performances. In many ways, his fingerprints remain visible throughout modern wrestling, even among fans who may never have watched one of his original matches. Yet this influence comes with a painful irony. The style that earned admiration from fellow wrestlers also accelerated the physical punishment he endured. Looking back with decades of hindsight, many performers now openly discuss balancing spectacular performances with career longevity. Conversations about concussion awareness, neck safety, and responsible scheduling have become far more common than they were during Dynamite Kid's era. His story serves as one of the clearest examples of why those conversations became necessary. Perhaps the most emotionally difficult aspect of the documentary is watching greatness slowly collide with reality. Athletic ability has limits. The human body has limits. Even legends cannot escape them forever. As injuries accumulated, mobility declined, and everyday life became increasingly difficult, the image of the unstoppable competitor began to fade. What remained was a man forced to confront the consequences of years spent pushing his body beyond reasonable limits, while also carrying the weight of complicated personal relationships that had fractured over time. By this point in the story, the audience begins to understand that Dark Side of the Ring is telling more than the biography of one wrestler. It is examining an entire culture that rewarded toughness, celebrated sacrifice, and often ignored the long-term consequences until it was too late. Dynamite Kid becomes both an individual and a symbol of an era that produced unforgettable performers, but demanded extraordinary personal costs in return. The second half of the documentary shifts its focus from the rise of a wrestling icon to the difficult reality that followed after the spotlight began to fade. This is where the episode becomes less about championships and legendary matches, and more about the lasting consequences of the choices, pressures, and culture that surrounded professional wrestling during that era. It reminds viewers that every spectacular performance has a human being behind it, and sometimes the applause disappears long before the pain does. As Dynamite Kid's career progressed, the physical damage became impossible to ignore. Years of taking hard bumps, competing through serious injuries, and constantly pushing his body beyond its natural limits had taken a devastating toll. Chronic pain became a daily part of life, rather than an occasional obstacle. The explosive athlete who once amazed crowds around the world gradually found himself struggling with basic mobility. For many retired athletes, losing the ability to perform is emotionally difficult. For someone whose identity was built almost entirely around being one of the toughest wrestlers alive, that transition was especially painful. One of the strongest elements of this episode is its willingness to present multiple perspectives. Former wrestlers, friends, family members, and people who knew Dynamite Kid personally describe a man who could be incredibly dedicated to wrestling, but also deeply difficult in his personal life. Their stories paint a picture that is neither entirely sympathetic nor entirely condemning. Instead, viewers are left with the uncomfortable realization that extraordinary talent and deeply flawed behavior can exist within the same person. The documentary also addresses allegations of abusive behavior discussed by family members and others interviewed for the episode. These accounts form an important part of understanding the full story, because they remind us that success inside the ring does not excuse harmful conduct outside of it. While many fans naturally admire Dynamite Kid for his revolutionary wrestling style, the episode encourages viewers to separate respect for athletic achievement from accountability for personal actions. That distinction is essential when looking at any historical figure, especially someone whose legacy continues to inspire debate. Another important topic explored throughout the episode is the wrestling culture of the 1980s. Looking back today, it becomes clear that many practices considered normal at the time would now raise serious concerns. Wrestlers often competed while injured, ignored medical advice, and relied on pain management simply to continue performing. There was immense pressure to appear physically dominant, and discussions about performance-enhancing drugs became part of the broader conversation surrounding the industry. While these issues affected many wrestlers of that generation, the documentary suggests that they also contributed to the physical decline experienced by performers like Dynamite Kid. This doesn't mean that every problem can be blamed on the wrestling business alone. One of the strengths of the documentary is that it avoids presenting overly simple answers. Personal responsibility, industry expectations, physical trauma, emotional stress, and individual choices all intersect throughout Dynamite Kid's life. Rather than assigning a single cause, the episode shows how multiple factors combined over many years to create a tragic outcome. That complexity is what makes the story feel authentic rather than sensational. From a historical perspective, it's impossible to deny Dynamite Kid's influence on professional wrestling. Countless performers who followed adopted elements of his style, whether they realized it or not. The combination of explosive athleticism, technical precision, believable intensity, and innovative offense helped redefine what audiences expected from elite wrestling. Watching modern wrestling today, fans regularly see sequences that trace their roots back to ideas Dynamite Kid helped popularize decades earlier. His rivalry with Japanese wrestling legend Tiger Mask is often cited as one of the most influential series of matches in wrestling history. Those contests demonstrated that storytelling could be driven not only by larger-than-life characters, but also by speed, athleticism, and technical excellence. Many historians believe those matches accelerated the evolution of junior heavyweight wrestling and inspired generations of performers across Japan, North America, Mexico, and beyond. Even viewers who have never heard of Dynamite Kid have likely watched wrestlers whose styles were shaped by his innovations. That influence creates one of the documentary's biggest emotional contradictions. How do we remember someone whose professional achievements changed an entire industry, while acknowledging that his personal life included serious failings? There is no easy answer, and perhaps that's exactly the point. History rarely presents perfect heroes or perfect villains. Instead, it presents complicated individuals whose accomplishments and mistakes both deserve examination. The documentary also quietly asks another important question. What responsibility does the audience have? Fans naturally celebrate incredible performances. We cheer dangerous stunts, impossible athletic feats, and wrestlers who seem willing to sacrifice everything for entertainment. But stories like Dynamite Kid's force us to consider what those sacrifices actually cost. Every breathtaking moment in the ring carries physical consequences that may not become visible until years later. Modern wrestling has made significant progress regarding medical care, concussion awareness, rehabilitation, and performer safety. But those improvements were often born from painful lessons learned through previous generations. Another reason this episode resonates is because it never feels like it is simply recounting wrestling history. At its heart, it explores universal themes that extend beyond sports. Obsession with greatness, the fear of becoming irrelevant, the consequences of ignoring personal well-being, and the struggle to separate professional success from personal happiness are challenges that exist in many careers. Wrestling merely provides the stage on which those struggles become dramatically visible. As the documentary reaches its conclusion, viewers are left reflecting on a legacy that remains impossible to summarize in a single sentence. Dynamite Kid was undeniably one of the most gifted wrestlers of his generation. His innovation transformed professional wrestling and influenced countless performers who came after him. At the same time, the episode reminds us that remarkable professional achievements cannot erase personal harm or difficult truths. Both realities exist together, and understanding that complexity is what gives the documentary its emotional weight. In many ways, Dark Side of the Ring succeeds because it refuses to tell audiences what they should think. Instead, it presents testimony, historical context, and personal experiences, allowing viewers to wrestle with difficult questions themselves. Was Dynamite Kid one of the greatest wrestlers who ever lived? Many experts would answer yes. Was his life also marked by painful decisions, broken relationships, and lasting consequences? The documentary presents substantial evidence suggesting that it was. Holding both of those ideas at the same time may feel uncomfortable, but it also leads to a more honest understanding of history. Looking back today, Perhaps the greatest lesson isn't simply about one wrestler. It's about an entire era that celebrated toughness above almost everything else. It is about recognizing that talent without balance can become destructive, that success without accountability carries consequences, and that legends are still human beings with strengths, weaknesses, and responsibilities. Those lessons remain just as relevant today as they were during Dynamite Kid's career. Ultimately, this episode stands out because it doesn't ask viewers to remember only the spectacular matches or only the painful controversies. Instead, it encourages us to see the complete picture. We witness a performer whose extraordinary ability permanently changed professional wrestling, while also confronting the personal cost of that greatness. That combination of admiration, sadness, and reflection is what makes this one of the most memorable episodes of Dark Side of the Ring. And perhaps that is the lasting legacy of Dynamite Kid. His matches continue to inspire wrestlers around the world. His innovations remain woven into the fabric of modern professional wrestling. Yet his life also serves as a powerful reminder that greatness in the ring should never come at the expense of health, compassion, or humanity. The greatest legacy any athlete can leave behind isn't simply changing a sport. It is proving that excellence and personal integrity can exist together. Dynamite Kid unquestionably transformed wrestling forever. His story reminds us why future generations must strive to preserve both the art of the performance and the well-being of the people who make that performance possible.